Welcome back, friends. There are parts of evolution that a creationist has no trouble accepting. Natural selection can and does produce new species of plants and animals. But as you shall see, evolution theory goes way beyond that. Let's take a look. Are you familiar with the scientific term species and natural selection? How about the biblical term kind? A species is a group of animals or plants that normally interbreed in the wild. There are many species in most kinds. There are dozens of species in the cat family, for example. But since most cats can interbreed, there is probably only one cat kind. Natural selection is the way that future generations of plants and animals may eventually become different from their ancestors. Natural selection is the same as artificial selection, with the exception of who does the selecting. In artificial selection, people do the selecting, and in natural selection, the environment does the selecting. In video 2, we reviewed a summary of the evolution story, starting with the Big Bang. Everything in that overview is false because it's contrary to Scripture. You may be surprised to learn that still many parts of the evolution story are not contrary to Scripture. As Christians, we are free to use our reason, our thinking ability, to determine whether these parts of evolution are true or false. The evolution story is partly true and partly false. A true part of evolution is that natural selection does produce new species of plants and animals. But a false part of evolution is the claim that natural selection also produces new kinds of plants and animals. There are many species in most biblical kinds. Every kind of plant and animal which exists today or which has gone extinct was created by God thousands of years ago during the 6 days of creation. No new kinds ever developed or come into being. New species develop, but always within their own kind. Natural selection is an important scientific discovery. It helps us better understand how a small number of biblical kinds became so many species. It helps us better understand how the estimated 40,700 species of amphibians, birds, mammals, and reptiles alive today could have descended from an estimated 627 kinds of those animals on Noah's Ark. For example, the bear kind on Noah's Ark must have had the genetic diversity necessary to produce offspring with a variety of fur color from light to dark. The bear cubs of these two Ark bears probably range from very light to very dark fur. Future generations of bears migrated throughout the globe. We can speculate how different bear species were produced by natural selection. Light-colored fur would be beneficial for bears living in snow-covered regions, and dark-colored fur would be beneficial for bears living in forests. And this is because bears whose fur blends into the surroundings would have an advantage while hunting, and prey animals are less likely to notice bears with fur matching the landscape. Bears with a hunting advantage would be more likely to find sufficient food and therefore grow to reproductive age. Animals that live long enough to reproduce then pass their traits to their offspring through their genes, their DNA. In this way, snow-covered environments would select light-colored bears and forests would select dark-colored bears. Eventually, separate species were produced. Polar bears who lost the genes for dark fur and grizzly bears who lost the genes for white fur. We know that grizzly bears and polar bears are the same biblical kind. We know this because they can mate and produce a growler, a bear whose father is a grizzly and a mother a polar bear, or a pizzly bear whose father is a polar and a mother is a grizzly. In our bear example, genetic diversity that existed in the parent population was lost due to selective breeding, producing two separate species within the bear kind. The environment selected which bears would breed and which would not breed, resulting in a loss of some DNA information. Well, that is a loss of genetic diversity. Each new species lost some ability that its ancestors possessed. This, however, would never produce a new kind of animal. A new kind of animal would require that new genetic information be added. In our bear example, genetic information was lost, but no new genetic information was gained. Creationists and evolutionists can agree that natural selection produces new species in this way, where no new kinds ever develop. Our bear example is one way that natural selection can produce a new species. There's another way. It's when a creature's DNA is mutated or damaged, causing a loss of information. This happened to a bacterium, causing an antibiotic-resistant superbug called H. pylori. Creationists and evolutionists can agree that natural selection produces new species in this way also, where no new kinds ever develop. Therefore, we see there are two ways that natural selection can produce new species, but always within the same kind. One way involves DNA mutations, and the other does not. There was no mutation involved in our bear example, but a mutation was involved in our bacterium example. So creationists and evolutionists can agree that natural selection produces new species in these two ways, but where no new kinds ever develop. And here's where evolutionists go a step beyond and claim that natural selection can and has produced new kinds of plants and animals. Now, evolutionists do not use the biblical term kind, neither do they accept that there is a barrier between kinds. God commanded that plants and animals reproduce within their own kind, and that established a barrier between kinds. Evolutionists do not accept such a barrier because it would prevent evolution from producing the new kinds of plants and animals that are necessary to their theory. Are evolutionists right about new kinds developing? Are dinosaurs the ancestors of birds? We're certain that the answer to both questions is no, because these things are contrary to the scriptures. And there are also logical problems with the thought that new kinds can naturally develop. New kinds of creatures would require new DNA information to build new body parts, such as a creature with scales gaining the information to grow feathers. Don't be misled. Evolutionists provide examples of new DNA information, such as mutations causing duplicated DNA information, or DNA information that is lost through mutation and later regained through another mutation. And these examples fit a wide definition of new DNA information, but they are not the type of new DNA information needed to produce a new kind. No matter how much a scaly reptile's DNA information is duplicated, that information for a feather will never be produced. In the next video, we will see that evolutionists often use the true parts of evolution as proof that the false parts are also true. Until that next lesson, God's blessings.